In this unit, we're going to be looking at what is called the reaction rate. That's to say, what affects the speed at which a chemical reaction takes place. Now, over the duration of this course, you've seen many different types of chemical reactions, and you'll know that some go very slowly while others go very rapidly indeed. So we're going to be thinking about what affects the rate of chemical reaction, and also we're going to be looking at how we can measure more quantitatively how fast a reaction takes place. So before we start, let's just have a look at a few examples which demonstrate this wide range of various reaction speeds that we've encountered. So for example, looking at the first reaction here, we've got what you can see clearly is the rusting of a tin can, and you'll know that the outside of the tin can is made from iron, and it's the iron that's rusting, and when it rusts it reacts with oxygen in the air around it and with water. So we can write out the equation for this reaction. Okay, we've got iron, okay, it's being oxidized, it's reacting with oxygen, but in order for this reaction to take place there has to be water present as well in the rusting process, and that gives us hydrated iron 3 oxide, Fa2O3, and then hydrated means that it contains water crystallization, so put a 2H2O there. This water is contained within the structure of the iron 3 oxide. Okay, so let's just quickly balance that. And the important point here is that we class this reaction as a very slow reaction. Okay, so if you leave this tin can out in your garden, it might take maybe 2 to 8 weeks to rust. An example of a faster reaction might be, for example, one that you've already seen is the reaction of magnesium with dilute hydrochloric acid. So here I've added some grains of magnesium to a 0.5 mole hydrochloric acid solution, and you'll notice that the reaction takes place quickly. Okay, very quickly hydrogen gas is released during the reaction, and you'll have some sort of collecting apparatus here, and the hydrogen will pass down the delivery tube and it will quickly displace the water stored in your test tube. And so we've got magnesium plus HCl produces magnesium chloride and hydrogen gas, and this would be a moderately fast reaction. It might take place anything between 10 to 30 seconds, let's just say. So that reaction goes a lot faster than the previous one, but you can get even faster reactions, for example explosions, which take place very quickly, very fast, and an explosion might take place within a fraction of a second. And so explosions, for example, nearly always involve the reaction of an oxidizing agent with a reducing agent, and this combination produces a whole lot of energy very, very quickly, and that results in an explosion. So for example, old-fashioned gunpowder involves an oxidizing agent which is saltpeter, whose chemical name is potassium nitrate, and that reacts with the reducing agents, in this case carbon and sulfur powder. And so these three are mixed together in powder form, and so once ignited a lot of energy is released and the reaction takes place very quickly indeed. And so those three examples demonstrate the wide range of reaction rates that you might come across. And so what we're going to be looking at in this unit is what affects the rate of reaction, and there are in fact 4 factors which can affect how fast a reaction takes place. And we're going to be looking at each of these in detail in the following unit, so I'm just going to briefly mention them now. The first thing is the temperature of the reactants, and then the next important thing is the surface area of the reactants, or the size of the particles involved in this reaction. Then we'll be looking at the concentration of the reactants if we're talking about, for example, a solid in a solution, or the pressure of the reactants if we're talking about gases, for example. And then finally, the fourth thing which affects the speed at which a reaction takes place is the presence of catalysts. So we'll be looking at each of these in detail. And we're going to be doing this, we're going to be looking at the four of these in the context of the particle model. In fact, what is called collision theory. So we'll learn that chemical reactions can only take place when the particles of the reactants collide with each other. And so we'll see what affects the speed, the rate of the chemical reaction. Really are two factors: the collision rate, that's to say the number of collisions which are taking place in a certain unit of time, and the collision rate is in fact affected by all four of these items here, and also the energy involved in the collision. We'll learn how the energy involved in the collision is important, and that is affected by the temperature. But we're going to look at that in much more detail in the next lesson. And then finally, one thing we also want to do, is not just to be able to say, well, this reaction goes quickly, this reaction goes slowly. We want to do a quantitative analysis of reaction rate. And so we're going to learn how to experimentally measure the speed of a chemical reaction, and to draw graphs similar to these, for example, which have been drawn here, which show how quickly the amount of product is being produced with time for a particular chemical reaction. So in each case we've got the same chemical reaction, A plus B goes to C plus D, and you can see that the speed of the chemical reaction is shown by the slope of the graph. So in the case of the blue graph here, we've got a gently sloping graph, and that indicates that the reaction is taking place slowly, whereas in the case of the red graph here we've got a much steeper slope, which shows that the chemical reaction is taking place a lot faster. So we're going to be thinking about, for the same chemical reaction, how we can affect the speed of that reaction by changing the conditions. That's to say, by changing the temperature, the surface area, using a catalyst, or changing the concentration or pressure of that reaction. So we're going to learn how to perform experiments which will give us quantitative graphs like this, and we're going to learn how to compare and interpret these graphs. So we're going to have a much closer look at this in the following lessons.